Some of Arizona's most puzzling crimes over the decades still leave some wondering about the rest of the story. Each case in this show examines a different question: the who, the how, and the why. Welcome to this True Crime Arizona special, Mysterious Deaths. Valentine's Day, 1982. A young girl found dead in rural northern Arizona. Who was she? The last known person to see her alive spent the past 4 decades trying to figure that out. Her headstone reads Valentine Sally, but 2 weeks after our investigation into the case aired, Valentine Sally has finally been identified.
It was a graveyard shift, and it was in the winter, 2:30 in the morning. She was a pretty girl. She really was, and she smiled a lot. But it's been a long time. But it would be nice if somebody could find a name. It would even put me to rest.
For many, Valentine's Day means love. For Patty Wilkins, it means loss.
Yeah, she's the only one I think about. My husband doesn't get a card.
It's been that way for almost 4 decades.
Or I wasn't there long enough, but I should have been there longer.
The story begins in early February, 1982. Patty's family owned the Monte Carlo truck stop west of Flagstaff, off I-40 in rural Ash Fork, Arizona. She worked at the restaurant on the property. During her graveyard shift, a man and a blonde girl walked in to eat. They seemed relaxed, nothing out of the ordinary.
Camaraderie between the two of them were like she knew him, and she was comfortable with him. The only thing I really got about him was he wore a cowboy hat with a peacock feather in it.
And the girl, she remembers to be 17 or 18, wearing a red and white striped sweater and jeans. She had a toothache, so Patty got her some aspirin. But what was unusual was for young girls to be at a truck stop with men in the middle of the night.
She seemed very comfortable with this gentleman, because I asked her, "Are you okay here? Do you want to stay here? Do you want to leave with him?" And she said, "Yeah, I'll go with him."
Patty never saw what truck they came in.
The next thing I heard about was that they found a girl in February the 14th, a mile from my restaurant.
A girl's decaying body found under a tree in the bitter cold. She was only dressed in a pair of jeans with broken belt loops. It looked like she had been dragged. Her sweater and bra were found on the ground nearby.
How did you make the determination that that was the girl you saw?
Well, first they showed me the pictures of the clothes. And yes, I recognized the clothes.
Coconino County Sheriff's deputies questioned Patty about everything she could remember.
I said, "I know that girl." He said, "Can you describe who she was with?" I said, "Yes, I can."
Patty believes she saw Valentine Sally alive here on February 2nd, but her body was found just a mile up the road on February 14th, and detectives believe she was dead for about 2 weeks before she was found.
Then when they interviewed me, he said, "Was there anything outstanding?" I told him about the toothache, and he said, "And what did you do?" "We crushed up a baby aspirin, is all I had, and we put it on that tooth." He said, "What side was it on?" I said, "Left side." He said, "That's our girl." The aspirin was still there.
The assumption was and is that girl was killed shortly after Patty saw her at the truck stop. People started calling the mystery girl Valentine Sally, a name that stuck with her for days, months, and years to follow.
When you first heard of Valentine Sally, what did you think?
It was curious from the onset.
Stan Kephart is a retired police chief and law enforcement expert. He sat down with us to take an outside look at this case.
How important is it to solve a Jane Doe case?
It is extremely important.
Sally's death is still a mystery. Suffocation is a working theory, but she didn't have broken bones.
The pressure that comes from the thumbs inward tends to fracture the hyoid bone. That, along with the struggle by the victim, usually will produce a fracture.
One aspect stumps Kephart, an aspect he believes makes finding a motive to take this girl's life even more obscure.
Are you surprised that there was no evidence of sexual assault?
That is, again, very surprising. What would be the purpose of your anger or a vendetta of some type?
What's the likelihood that the man she was seen with is involved in this?
It is highly likely.
2 years later, in 1984, the girl was identified as Melody Cutlip, a Florida girl who had run away in 1980. A forensic expert matched bite marks of Valentine Sally to dental records of Melody Cutlip. But Melody returned home alive to her family in 1986. Kephart says the misidentification was a huge case misstep.
It is the fault of the expert presenting something that was flawed and the agency not vetting that person.
The girl with no name found a place in Patty's heart. The last person to see her alive didn't want her to be laid to rest as just a number, adding to a long list of missing persons.
We took up a benefit for her so we could get her a headstone.
Patty had it engraved, Valentine Sally.
I would be willing to get another headstone and put it up there if we could find out who she was.
That wish came true for Patty just weeks after we sat down with her.
Well, I'm gonna cry. As I said, it's like one of my girls. I can't believe it. That was a godsend.
February 22nd, 2021, the Coconino County Sheriff's Office identified Valentine Sally as 17-year-old Carolyn Eaton of St. Louis, Missouri. They received a familial DNA kit through a grant last year and made the positive match to the Eaton family.
I wish we'd have been able to do this years ago, but we didn't have the capabilities that technology gives us today.
Coconino County Sheriff Jim Driscoll says Carolyn had run away from home around Christmas Day in 1981. He does believe Patty was the last person to see her alive, besides her killer. Sheriff Driscoll says it's likely the man Carolyn was with that night at the restaurant is involved in her death.
There's other indications of things that we're just not able to share at this point. Things that only a suspect would know. There are a number of serial killers out there.
For so many years, who Valentine Sally was a mystery. Now, who killed her is what investigators desperately want to find out. But even just learning her identity has put Patty's heart to rest.
She finally gets to go. Yeah, we've got a name, and I'm no longer in charge of her. I love you, and I'm glad you're going home.
If you have any information about potential suspects in the Carolyn Eaton murder case, please call the Coconino County Sheriff's Office.
Coming up on True Crime Arizona, Mysterious Deaths.
What was so bad that I lost all the rest of those years with my son.
A Phoenix police officer found dead. At first, the search was on to find who killed him. Then, for some, the narrative changed.
I do believe it was a suicide staged to look like a homicide.
Do you think he was killed by somebody he knew?
Yes.
What happened to Officer Sean Drenth? That story after the break. You're watching an Arizona's Family Special, True Crime Arizona, Mysterious Deaths.
Homicide or suicide? It's been a debate for over a decade. What led to the shooting death of Phoenix Police Sergeant Sean Drenth back in 2010? On the surface, there are several elements of this case that don't add up either way. But after so much time has gone by, Drenth's family has suspicions about how this happened and why, to them, those suspicions have grown much stronger.
The years go by, the memories fade, but for Diane Drenth, the questions never leave her mind.
It's not even that I want somebody punished or, sent to prison for the rest of their life, but I want to know why. I want to know what was so bad that I lost all the rest of those years with my son.
The beginning of fall in Phoenix, October 18th, 2010. She had talked to her son on the phone a couple days prior.
I was at home, and it was probably about, 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe, when the doorbell rang.
A group of Phoenix police officers at her door. Sean Drenth's body had been found in a parking lot near the state capitol, a gunshot wound under his chin from a shotgun laying on top of his stomach, his handgun thrown over a nearby fence, the knees of his uniform covered in dirt. But while officers initially told Diane they believed Sean had been involved in some kind of fight before he was killed, the conversation and investigation changed to that of a staged suicide.
I mean, there's not one little bit of me that ever believed for a nanosecond that it was suicide. I mean, I knew my son. He was very happy.
So where was a staged suicide coming from? We took the case to retired Tempe Police Sergeant Kevin Booncher, who is now a private investigator. We wanted an objective expert to look at all the details in this case.
And I think the biggest problem overall with the scene was it was completely destroyed and contaminated. It was terrible.
Officers stormed the scene in a matter of minutes after Sean's body was found, leaving new DNA and footprints all over the scene.
Would you go as far as to say that Phoenix PD botched that initial investigation from the start in terms of the crime scene itself?
You know, botched is a strong word, and I hate to use it, but I think that any Phoenix person, Phoenix supervisor would admit that that's exactly what happened.
He says there are undeniable oddities about factors in this case.
The fact that the shotgun was used, which is typically, and again I can't say for sure, but is typically secured inside of the patrol car. How did that shotgun get unsecured and out?
But let's assume somebody was able to get it out. Kevin says a physical fight would take place, one that would cause more than just a couple dirty knees.
Just a basic fight that goes to the ground, you got more than scratches on your uniform pants. Stuff is torn up. You've got scrapes, you've got elbow scratches, you've got, if they happen to hit you, you got bruising and abrasions on your face.
He came to the same conclusion others, like the medical examiner, came to.
I do believe it was a suicide staged to look like a homicide. And the shotgun is one of the elements that leads me to that conclusion.
He says officers know there's a chance you can survive with a handgun shot to the head, but know a shotgun wound will be fatal every time, especially with a shot under the chin. Kevin also believes there was a motive for suicide.
There were criminal charges pending against this police sergeant for some crimes that were committed within the department.
Several Phoenix police officers were involved in a fraud case, being paid thousands of dollars for work at an off-duty site they didn't do.
Sergeant Sean Drenth was part of the investigation, and as I understand it, he would have met the AG's office criteria for grand jury consideration.
When your persona and your whole being is being a cop who is this great person, but you know this serious issue is coming down the pipe, and it's going to definitely blacken your reputation, that makes people do things.
But his family says the investigation had been going on for some time, and Sean believed he did nothing wrong.
Do you believe that incident was involved in his death?
I really don't. That investigation had been going on for years, and we knew about it.
It wasn't new.
Sean knew about it. It wasn't new. Sean was promoted to sergeant even though that investigation was going on.
Diane says that fraud investigation wasn't a big deal until Sean's death.
I feel like somebody who knew about it made sure it got out there as the only motive they could ever find for suicide.
And backing up Diane's theory, the city of Phoenix awarded Sean's widow, Colleen, full line-of-duty death benefits, something that doesn't happen with suicide.
And if the widow is pulling full line-of-duty death benefits, then the conclusion would be that it was labeled as a homicide. But if it's labeled as a homicide that has not been solved, I don't know how that could be closed.
Diane believes her son had gone to the parking lot that night to meet up with somebody who may have been in hot water.
Do you think he was killed by somebody he knew?
Yes. I think that he knew something that he hadn't shared with anyone else, because he would keep your secret and give you a chance to make it right.
She believes whoever took her son's life knew how to make it look like a suicide.
I do believe it was somebody in law enforcement, and I believe they did know how to stage the scene.
And more than that, she believes it was not just somebody in law enforcement, but a direct coworker of Sean's, an inside job.
So just to be clear, do you believe it was somebody within Phoenix Police Department that killed Sean?
I do. I do. I believe it's somebody that he knew in the Phoenix Police Department.
Do you think it's surprising that Phoenix PD won't do an interview with me about it?
No, not at all. It's a hot topic. I wouldn't do it. If I was the chief of police, I'd say, no, we're not going to do that. Because what do they have to gain?
For the Drenth family, hope fades over time. Answers they thought they'd get never came. But they believe somebody knows something, and no matter what that is, they just want to know the truth.
I never, ever, ever for one moment thought it would not be solved. He would want us to go on, but it's hard to do that.
I asked Phoenix police to sit down for an interview with me to talk about the details of this case and asked if this is still an open investigation. The department told me the case is closed at this time and they are not available for interviews on it.
Coming up on True Crime Arizona, Mysterious Deaths.
The trunks were leaking blood.
She became infamously known as the 1931 Trunk Murderess.
I remember as a child people saying, "You better be good or Winnie Ruth Judd is going to get you."
Convicted of killing her best friends and chopping up the bodies. But did she act alone?
You put a woman away for 40 years and you're not sure she committed the crime?
That story when we return. You're watching an Arizona's Family Special, True Crime Arizona, Mysterious Deaths.
She'd become known as a vicious killer of the 1930s, infamously remembered in Phoenix history as the Trunk Murderess. Winnie Ruth Judd, convicted of killing her friends, chopping up bodies, and taking them on a train. The big question, why? Why would she do this? Decades later, a theory came to light.
A party girl, a mistress, a murderer, and 40 years later,
I find out she's alive. She's still alive. She's living in California.
Newspaper reporter Jana Boomersback would be the only one to interview the Trunk Murderess herself, Winnie Ruth Judd, and it was nothing like she ever expected.
I mean, I was consumed with this story. I said, you put a woman away for 40 years and you're not sure she committed the crime?
It all began in 1931. Phoenix was a small town back then where people were trying to make a name for themselves.
That was the mentality of that time. It was very much a man's world.
I will remember.
Winnie Ruth Judd, just 26 years old, was a medical secretary by day, known on the social scene by night. And though her husband was back in LA, she found someone new.
Who is Jack?
Jack is her boyfriend, her illicit boyfriend.
Jack Halloran, a well-known businessman in Phoenix at the time, a playboy of sorts, known to flirt with many women. That included Winnie Ruth's best friends, Sammy Samuelson and Ann Leroy. That friendship was cut short by Winnie herself when an argument about Jack Halloran broke out among the girls. Ann was shot dead. Sammy was shot dead. Winnie Ruth blacked out and woke up with a shot in her hand. Evidence from 2 guns was found at the scene.
Oh no, there was only 1 gun. I said, well, there's 2 guns at the end. Where's the other gun? And she was like looking at me for the first time, like as though understanding that something else had happened in that house that night that she had no knowledge of.
So she stuck to the course that she did not do it in her conversations with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you believe her?
Absolutely, absolutely. She killed one of those women in self-defense.
And maybe people would have believed that story at first, but what happened next earned her the name, the Trunk Murderess. Winnie Ruth boarded a train to LA with 2 trunks and a hat box. In them were Ann and Sammy's bodies, Sammy's body chopped into pieces. Train workers knew something was off and opened the trunks.
She was caught with the goods. You know, the trunks were leaking blood. I mean, the whole thing was so ugly and so gruesome.
Winnie Ruth fled the scene, only to be found at an LA funeral home days later and arrested. She wrote in her diary,
I admit this was a ghastly deed. I've asked God many times to forgive me for the part I played in transporting the trunk to Los Angeles. But I was sick, wounded, and suffering from shock.
The fight happened here.
We are at 2929 North 2nd Street, Phoenix, Arizona. And this house is known as the Murder House or the Murder Cottage.
Robert Warnicki owns the house where the infamous murders happened. To him, it's a piece of history.
I remember as a child people saying, you better be good or Winnie Ruth Judd is going to get you and she's going to cut you up.
There are 2 theories about how the fight between Winnie Ruth, Ann, and Sammy went down. The house layout is still the same today.
One story has the murders happening in the kitchen. That's the story I like to believe.
She was struggling with Sammy here with the gun, and Annie was hitting her over the head with an ironing board here. and the gun went off and killed Sammy, and then she turned and killed Annie here. That's one version.
But there's another.
Killed Annie in the bedroom, and then killed Sammy when she came out of the bathroom. And then if the cutting happened here, that's the tub.
Winnie Ruth claims she did not cut up Sammy's body. Jana says she wouldn't know how even if she wanted to, and believes Jack Halloran and another man were involved and in the house that night too.
This body was cut up through the spine. Through the spine. You have got to be a doctor to know how to cut a human body up through the spine, because there's only certain places you can cut in order to sever that spinal cord.
If Winnie Ruth didn't do it, Jack Halloran's not a doctor.
No.
Who would have done this and come into that scene to do that?
The doctor that Jack Halloran could blackmail to do his bidding.
Jana uncovered a letter sent to the LA Times from a well-known Phoenix historian in the 30s, detailing a Dr. Brown who Jack Halloran had helped get a job. The letter said it became well known that Jack had Dr. Brown cut up the body, and Dr. Brown's conscience caught up with him. He was going to confess his role to a judge, but mysteriously committed suicide the day before.
See how suspicious this is? Did he commit suicide? Did somebody off him to say, you shut up? They were telling, they threatened the sheriff.
Did we ever find out if it was suicide or if he was murdered?
No, we don't. But the suspicions are so high. The suspicions are so high that this guy, who could not stand it anymore, was going to go and he was going to go and tell the judge that what had happened.
And he would have had the surgical knowledge and experience to make those.
He was a medical doctor, right? He was a medical doctor, right?
In fact, Jana believes Jack Halloran orchestrated the entire attempted cover-up, so his name and reputation wouldn't be stained.
She was manipulated by Halloran. He's the one who said to her, you know, take the trunks on the train. I'll have somebody in LA to meet you. We'll throw the trunks in the ocean. No one will ever know what happened to these girls. You'll all be fine and safe. There was no one in LA to meet her.
Winnie was convicted of one of the murders and set to be hanged to death. Instead, she was deemed mentally incompetent and sent to an insane asylum where she would escape 6 different times over 30 years.
Do you believe she actually was mentally insane?
No, no. She was terrified, but she was never insane.
The last escape, she made it to San Francisco working as a nanny, and by the time authorities caught her, they decided she had suffered enough and set her free. But the question of why she killed her friends and took the trunks on the train remained unanswered. Through Jana's investigation, she believes that answer finally came into focus.
So when she talks about her affair with Halloran, she says, this is my sin. When she talks about the death of her 2 best friends, this is my tragedy.
Sex was taboo. Religious morals were expected to be followed. Winnie Ruth Judd's actions may not have been those of a cold-blooded killer. Her motive was her guilty conscience, but not that of a murderess, but of a mistress.
She was doing everything she could to cover up her affair. You know, she knew she didn't kill these girls, she didn't murder these girls, she didn't, and she certainly didn't cut them up. So she was like the whole time trying to pretend that, well, if I play along with him, I do what he says I should do, then no one will ever discover that we're having an affair, and then no one will ever know my sin.
But 2 wrongs never make a right.
So that would then mean that she was more willing to be pegged as a killer than a cheater.
You know, actually, yes. Actually, yes. That's a very good observation. She thought, because she knew she didn't kill him.
Winnie Ruth Judd lived to be in her 90s. Jack Halloran died decades earlier. We'll be right back.
You're watching an Arizona's Family Special, True Crime Arizona, Mysterious Deaths. You're watching an Arizona's Family Special, True Crime Arizona, Mysterious Deaths.
This special featured some of Arizona's most mysterious death cases. But if you want more of your true crime fix, check out True Crime Arizona, the podcast, a deep dive into many more cases from around the state. You can listen to the podcast on all major platforms. Thank you so much for watching True Crime Arizona, Mysterious Deaths. I'm Briana Whitney.